Hi, thanks for seeing me. I'd like to discuss Youssef's case today as he disclosed self-harm in his session recently and I didn't conduct a risk assessment. He also asked me not to involve his family, but I ended up calling his father without consent. So I'd like to work through this using the 7-stage Kuchar and Keith-Spiegel model, if that's okay. So stage 1, the dilemma here is between two obligations in the Code of Conduct. First, my duty to manage risk under section 7.1, and second, my obligation to maintain Youssef's confidentiality under section 3.3. The dilemma is this: when a 19-year-old client discloses self-harm but withholds consent for family involvement, can confidentiality be overridden to manage risk, and if so, on what basis? Moving on to stage 2, there are a number of ethical standards and legislation that I'd like to cover. Risk management under section 7.1 of the Code requires me to actively assess and respond to risk when self-harm is disclosed. That obligation determines whether further action, including disclosure to third parties, is justified. So at the same time, section 3.3, confidentiality, requires me to protect Youssef's information unless disclosure is reasonably necessary to prevent serious threat under the standards of the Privacy Act. Now, that threshold must be established through assessment and not assumed. So also informed consent under section 4.2 as a prior condition here. Youssef must understand the limits of confidentiality before deciding what to disclose. Because I didn't clarify this, his disclosure was not fully informed, and this undermines the very basis of any subsequent decision. These standards operate as a sequence: clarify confidentiality, assess the risk, and then determine whether disclosure is justified. So I broke that sequence by disclosing to his father without prior assessment, making the decision premature and indefensible by the Code. So stage 3 is the values trap, and there's two values shaped by judgment when they really shouldn't have here. The first one is intuition. I rely quickly on reading people, but in this case I assumed risk without evidence and acted without assessment. As Kankeman explains in 2011, fast intuitive thinking can override more deliberate reasoning under pressure. The second one is protectiveness. The urge to act quickly to reduce harm led me to override the risk management process under section 7.1 of the Code. That's when I called his father. So I'm currently managing this through structured decision making, early supervision, and documenting my reasoning before acting now. So moving on to stage 4, as a 19-year-old adult, Youssef has full rights to confidentiality, informed consent, and autonomous decision making. His disclosure of self-harm increases his vulnerability and strengthens my obligation to protect those rights. Now, his father has no legal right to his information, and my disclosure increased Youssef's vulnerability here. So also with his brother Ahmed in the session, another vulnerability and power dynamic was introduced that I didn't address, potentially limiting Youssef's ability to speak freely and raising concerns under sections 3.3 confidentiality and 4.2 informed consent. For stage 5, I'd like to discuss two ethically defensible options that I could take depending on whether the threshold for disclosure is met. So option A is to maintain confidentiality after assessment. Here, I would pause the session, ask Ahmed to step out, clarify the limits of confidentiality under section 4.2 with Youssef, and conduct a structured risk assessment. If serious risk is not established, I would maintain confidentiality under section 3.3, develop a collaborative safety plan, and consult my supervisor at that point. This option prioritizes Youssef's autonomy and treats disclosure as a last resort, consistent with section 7.1 risk management. For option B, on the other hand, I would conduct a risk assessment, but then I'd proceed to a third-party disclosure if the risk threshold was met. So here, I would take the same steps as option A to assess the risk. However, if serious risk is established, I would initiate a limited and proportionate disclosure to a third party to reduce harm, ideally with Youssef's involvement. Now, this option prioritizes risk management under section 7.1 and recognizes that confidentiality under section 3.3 is not absolute, especially where there is clear and immediate threat. So the distinction between these options is not really the process, but the threshold whether risk justifies overriding confidentiality. So stage 6, the consequences for option A are as follows. In the short term, Youssef's autonomy is preserved, supporting the therapeutic alliance and increasing the likelihood of future disclosure, which is a key protective factor. The risk is that harm could occur if his self-harm risk is underestimated here from the risk assessment. In the medium term, a collaborative safety plan supports engagement and follow through. As Stanley and Brown, 2012 show, collaborative safety planning is much more effective than imposed interventions. Now, the family are not informed at this point, and this may feel unsatisfactory, but it avoids disruption where consent has not been given. So for me, this is a defensible position under sections 3.3 and 7.1 as it reflects proportionate assessment-based decision making. Now the consequences for option B are this. In the short term, collaborative third-party disclosure may feel protective for USEF. However, if it's imposed, it risks damaging that therapeutic alliance. Ford and Associates in 2017 show that young people who experience confidentiality breaches are much less likely to seek future help. In the medium term, where risk is clearly imminent, third-party disclosure may reduce harm and is very justified under sections 4.2 and 7.1 of the code. However, if not clearly warranted, it risks unnecessary loss of trust. For the family, disclosure may provide reassurance here, but without USEF's consent to them, it risks undermining his trust and sense of safety. So for me, third-party disclosure is defensible, is a defensible safety precaution when justified, but without risk assessment, it increases regulatory risk. So the key issue here is whether risk meets the threshold for disclosure. If it does not, breaching confidentiality causes more harm than benefit, and if it does, disclosure is justified to prevent harm. Moving on to stage 7, my decision is to begin with option A, maintaining confidentiality, whilst recognising that option B may follow if risk is established. This is therefore a sequential decision. Assessment comes first and disclosure is only considered if that threshold is reached. My enactment plan is to re-engage USEF and arrange an urgent follow-up. I'll complete the risk assessment, acknowledge the impact of my early decision to contact his father, and clarify confidentiality and its limits. I'll document the session and seek supervision. There is a residual risk here though. USEF may be disengaged following the initial breach and harm may have been missed from in that first session. These will be monitored through follow-up and supervision. Thanks, bye.